Okay, good morning all. Special welcome to those who've joined the committee fresh from the elections. Welcome to you. I'm Councillor Paul Heinrich and I'll be chairing this meeting of the Development Committee this morning. For anyone who hasn't attended these meetings before, the officers who provide and present our reports and offer technical advice sit either side of me at the top table. In front of me in the central area sit the members of the committee who will be making decisions on the items on the agenda. Can officers please introduce themselves?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jeff Lyon. I'm the Development Manager at North Norfolk.
Good morning, I'm Lauren Gregory. I'm Democratic Services Officer.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Joseph Barrow and I'm a Senior Planning Officer.
Morning, everyone. I'm Fiona Croxton and I'm a solicitor to the council.
Thank you. Before we move to formal business, just the usual short notices. We're not expecting a fire alarm today, certainly not a drill. So if the alarm does sound, follow officers using the marked exits there and there. Do not use the lift. We assemble in the car park in front of buildings or by the flagpole to the rear. Could you please put mobile phones to off? A reminder to myself to do just that. It's usually you, Andrew. Right. If we're still going at 11, we will take a break for coffee. I would hope that with a short agenda, we will not need that. And we certainly wouldn't expect to be around at lunchtime. So we'll move to the main agenda. Apologies for absence, Lauren.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Rory MacDonald, Councillor Martin Beattie, and from the Assistant Director for Planning.
Thank you. Any substitutes?
We have two substitutes. Councillor Tim Adams is present as a substitute for Councillor Rory MacDonald, and Councillor Liz Wivington as present as a substitute for Councillor Martin Beattie.
Thank you. Item 4 then, minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of April. Some of you were present at that meeting. I'm going to take it that you have read them in detail. Are there any errors? Victoria.
It's on bottom of page 3. It says planning conscious. I think that's just an error of word choice there. And then there's another on bottom of page 9. It says patients with dementia may wonder. I think it's wonder. Well, I'm sure they wonder as well, but wonder's what you meant. And there's a few apostrophes missing, but I'm not mentioning those. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Okay. Are we agreed that as amended, those are an accurate record? Thank you.
Please, could I just have a proposal in a second, please?
Yes. Councillor Brown, Councillor Fisher.
And then just a quick show of hands if you're all in agreement. Thank you.
Thank you for reminding me there. Items of urgent business.
There are no items of urgent business.
Thank you. We'll take the business in the order it's set out on the agenda. What we do, so could I ask for declarations of interest? Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to declare that I do know socially a director of Morstan Palatine.
Yeah. Have a hot day.
Same. I'm in the same position, Chair. Thank you.
Right, we move to the reports. Item 8, Sheringham PF 22-1660, 37 suite apartment hotel, Class C1 with associated access, parking and landscaping, land to east of the Reef Leisure Centre, Webburn Road, Sheringham, for Morstan Palatine Limited. Those who served previously will be aware that we deferred this from a previous meeting. It has now come back with further information. I will ask Joe to do the full report for benefit of new members. Thank you. We're all fully aware of what's going on there. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, as you quite rightly said, this is a 37 suite apartment hotel in use class C1. with associated access, parking and landscape adjacent to the recent reef development to the west of Sheringham. It does indeed follow the deferral at committee on the 23rd of March 2023, and that was at the request of providing greater clarity on renewable energy provision and sustainable surface water drainage, but yes, we will go through all relevant issues, of course. So the site location plan just off the A149 there, adjacent to the Reef Leisure Centre, between the reef itself and Weybourne Road Industrial Estate. The golf course and the A149 are to the north, as well as the area of outstanding natural beauty for Norfolk Coast, and Sheringham Football Club is found to the south. Again, just showing further on the satellite imagery there as well for your record. So the proposed site plan, you'll see all the parking spaces to the south, and then a courtyard development. You also notice the solar array on that image as well. The courtyard would form a nice entranceway with the reef development itself, and the access point is more towards the south of the car park, making use of the existing access arrangements approved as part of the Reef Leisure Centre development. So working through the various floor plans, you'll see that there's provision for a bar and reception at ground floor, as well as laundry, refuse areas, plant rooms, etc., as well as some of the apartments, including the accessible ones to be located at ground floor. The first floor is mostly just the accommodation to be provided. Same again for the second floor. And the third floor, you'll notice some accommodation provision, as well as the solar array again to be provided on the slightly shorter southern element. So the proposed north and west elevations, the north elevation is quite important, and we'll show it in context with the reef. We're of the opinion that there's sort of clear efforts to marry the two in terms of scale, in terms of materials palette, and ultimately the assessment is that the design overall is acceptable, and they work quite well as a pair of quite large ultimately projects, but they do frame the entrance to Sheringham quite nicely and work together quite well. You'll see in the courtyard elevation there, so this is just within the courtyard, this sort of the stepped almost sculpture element with some seating and planting and things as well there, just as a bit of a feature. Again, that will be adjacent to the entrance to the Reef Leisure Centre. And again, the framed main entrance there with the cladding and the apartheid Art Deco styling of the font there. From the south elevation and the east elevation, you'll see the south elevation at the bottom again has the reef in context. That would be the elevation that would be visible from the car park proposed. And the east elevation would be what you may be able to see to varying degrees as you approached the apartment hotel from Sheringham itself. So proposed landscaping plan it is obviously maybe a touch difficult to view in full detail, I suppose, but there is quite extensive landscaping proposed. You'll see some hedging. There's some deterrent planting to the south corner there to prevent any climbing as well as landscaping to the site frontage adjacent to the path that links the development to Sheringham Town Centre itself. So looking through the site photos, as you'll notice, this is from the A149 on Weybourne Road, walking eastwards towards Sheringham. The reef itself will likely be the first thing you would see as you approach from Weybourne, with the development sat largely behind it. But as you sort of get beyond the reef, you can see obviously the site that the building would occupy. The site frontage there, you'll notice the industrial units to the left-hand side, as well as Sheringham football pitch and residential properties beyond that, the reef car park to the right-hand side. From Sheringham itself, this would be the view. You can obviously see the reef at present in the right-hand side in both of those pictures. The development would obscure the reef from this perspective, providing that east elevation viewpoint that we showed it a couple of slides ago. From the courtyard now, looking at the site, sort of to the looking to the north on the left-hand side there, you'd see how where the courtyard would sort of sit and work together with the existing seating arrangements that we do have as part of the Reef development. And then looking to the south, that would largely be the car parking area with the football club stands just to the very right-hand side of that photo. From the south boundary of the site, you will see obviously how the development would likely sit in conjunction with the Reef and between the Reef and the industrial unit on the right-hand side, as well as the approximate point for the new access into the hotel's car park itself. And then just as a perspective from the residential area to the very south of the football pitch, these are sort of the closest dwellings, the ones that would have the most common and best view of the development. You'd see that it would sit about as high as the Reef in terms of the overall scale, and in behind the football pitch there as well. So the key provisions of the development are a split form proposal, really, with 3 to 4 stories in height. There are 37 suites, and the breakdown is there with 10 one-bed studios, 18 one-bedroom suites, 6 two-bedroom suites, and 3 accessible suites. 49 total car parking spaces are proposed, but there would also be pedestrian access to the bus stops as well at the north of the site. 7 of those are electric vehicle and 2 of those are EV and disability accessible, with 1 disability accessible non-electric car parking space. There's motorcycle and bicycle parking provision and hard and soft landscaping across the site with the Art Deco styling of the building. In terms of the matters that were particularly that were the matters for deferral following the March committee, the additional information has been submitted since that date that has been reviewed by the lead local flood authority, and comments have been received on the 9th of May stating no objection to the surface water drainage strategy that is submitted as part of the scheme, subject to a build to condition. So we have indeed drafted such a condition that would ensure the surface water drainage strategy is adhered to and brought forwards within reasonable timescales as part of the development. And in relation to renewable energy provision, an energy statement has been submitted by the applicants as well, committing to the following measures. So you'll see over 22,000 kilowatt hour photovoltaic array, the use of air source heat pumps, building management and monitoring systems throughout, mechanical ventilation, heat recovery, as well as the electric vehicle charging points that we discussed a short while ago. In liaison with the building control team at the council, officers are very much content that the submitted energy statement, inclusive of those measures, if brought forward, would satisfy the requirements of policy EN6 of the adopted North Norfolk core strategy, and ultimately, you know, that's a real positive step versus the scheme that was put forward towards you in March. So overall, the recommendation is one of approval, subject to the imposition of conditions to cover the following matters, with the exact wording and amount of conditions to be considered necessary by the Assistant Director of Planning, including those energy statement conditions, the build to conditions relating to drainage, and in accordance with the lead local flood authority as well. Thank you very much, Chair.
Right, we now move to speakers. I have no town or parish speaker. I have no objecting speaker. I have no supporting speaker. Are you representing local members? Thank you, Councillor Willington. You have your 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I spoke last time on this issue and expressed some concerns. So really this is about readdressing those concerns. The feedback from the local community has been a concern for impact on the local economy due to the model proposed with the sale of the apartments. And perhaps more of a concern is the loss of employment land that could provide greater amounts of employment than this model does. Sheringham only has 6 hectares of employment land identified anyway, so every little scrap of that matters to Sheringham greatly, and by reducing that opportunity, I think this would be a missed opportunity for the town. It also, in terms of planning, I think impacts on our use of our sustainability goals in terms of economic growth and the potential to reduce inequality. Design has also come up in that we are next to the award-winning Reef. Well, hopefully award-winning, it's been nominated. And I think we would all agree that the design of that has been excellent. There is a feeling that this is, as Art Deco, is actually out of character with the town, because the majority of the town is Edwardian, end of Victorian, and it certainly doesn't marry in with the spacious aspect of the golf club opposite, given that there is quite an intensity in the site and a domination by a large building. Concerns have all been, oh, and I should refer to the AONB there, because as the gateway to the town, it's also the gateway to the AONB. So you can see it from the coastal path. The Reef nestles in quite nicely, whereas people feel that that perhaps is going to be more dominating. In terms of construction, with the location at the front of the site, this is going to restrict access to construction processes for buildings with HDVs, in that we have the porous car park across the back of the Reef, which will have to be traversed by HGVs and is not currently permissible because of damage to the potential damage to the surface. So we are faced with putting perhaps a risk in that, given if vehicles need or have to, that we could have potential damage to our SUD system on there, and obviously a considerable cost in putting that right as a result of construction. And actually this continues in terms of the operation processes needed for the site, in that deliveries using HGVs would not be able to access over the car park, as I understand it, and they would have to unload on the main road. We have the construction of Westwood at the moment, which has access directly onto the site and vehicles can access it, but we've just had limited traffic management on the main road, which has been disruptive in itself. So I think to have that on an ongoing basis at that operation would be not beneficial. It's also in a area where the speed limits are not reduced down to 30, it's just beyond the boundary. So that might be something which is needed to be considered if that is to go ahead. So overall, the view is that by allowing this to go ahead, it will be a missed opportunity for an alternative use which could provide greater employment. The design of it, is people generally feel, is out of character and not conducive to that small space, and they would really prefer an alternative use, which I know has been discussed by this council. Thank you.
Okay, obviously a number of issues have been raised in the representation. As we said last week in sort of committee training, we have to sort of weigh up those issues that are relevant and material to the decision that you're making. Now, the issue about crossing the existing Reef car park and potentially damaging that's in effect a civil matter between the council as owners of that car park and a developer. So it'll be a matter for the council and the developer to agree how that any remediation would be secured if that access way is damaged. That wouldn't directly be a planning matter that you could refuse permission on the basis of impact on a civil matter. So yes, it could potentially be an issue, but it's to my mind, it's not directly a planning issue that the committee need concern itself with today. There are obviously other issues raised as well within that representation, but yeah, I'm happy to take any other questions.
Thank you, Chair. Could you just clarify for me, I think it was in the environmental bit, it says it had a building management system. Can you just explain what that is?
Yeah, so the full details of that are in the energy statement. I think it works with the monitoring system in terms of smart lighting, other such measures like that in terms of maybe automatic lights that turn off or other such measures. But it's
Okay,
about
so-
the overall.
Yeah, it's
view.
automatic, no human invention there. It's just something that will take care of itself.
Yeah, it's about trying to, or like I say, automate some of the not being wasteful, things like
Sure.
that. Just trying
Okay.
to monitor that sort of energy consumption side of things. Its commitment to that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'd like to say I'm really pleased that they've vastly improved their carbon footprint on this, because that was a massive concern to us. My other question I'd like to ask is why is there only just one, in total 3 disabled parking spaces? Because 2 are electric and there's literally only 1 more. I'm surprised there's so few. Is there a reason for that? Thank you.
I mean, we do have adopted car parking standards, and my understanding is the number of disabled spaces accords with the policy. I mean, with EV charging, I mean, you can't discriminate between sort of standard parking and disabled parking. So there needs to be the provision for people who may have disabilities to use electric vehicles to get to and from the site. So it's about making sure that there is an option there for people to charge their car and have access to getting in and out of their vehicle and getting into the building. So that's the arrangement that the applicants put forward, and we've got no objection in principle to the arrangements they're putting forward for charging.
Could I just come back on that? No, I accept that, Jeff. I suppose my question would there be any form of, say, for instance, more disabled people turned up that they could be catered for, and perhaps additional parking laid on for them if that was the case? It just seems quite limited, the disabled parking. That's my point, really.
So the 3 number of spaces isn't limited. It's what the policy requires. I suppose the question you're asking, well, I'm assuming you're asking, is if other people turn up that don't have an electric car, should we over provide for disabled, in effect provide 3 disabled spaces that aren't electric charging points, and then have 2 additional electric charging points that I mean, that's not what's proposed. So obviously we have to, as a committee, determine what's before us. The proposal in terms of number of spaces is compliant with policy. So that's why we haven't objected, and the Highway Authority haven't objected on parking numbers. It's a judgment for the committee, isn't it, as to whether you consider the number of electric charging spaces is sufficient. We say we don't directly have policy at the moment requiring electric vehicle charging. This is something that the applicants put forward voluntarily. I think it's something we should welcome as a committee. But we will have to grapple with this question about how many charging spaces do we need on sites, because as more and more people acquire electric cars, there will be more competition for charging spaces. So it's something we're going to have to grapple with in the future. But for now, I think we are content as officers that what they're proposing is in accordance with our expectations and policy requirements.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Still learning how to drive my new laptop. I was obviously on the committee in March when we deferred this. I am content that most of the issues that we raised or were concerned about have been addressed. I was particularly concerned about surface water drainage. And as long as you keep a very close watch on that, bearing in mind the difficulties we've had along the coast in respect of Anglian water discharging because of, storm events coming into the sewage system and then everything having to go into the sea. We really, really need to be very, very tight on any sort of surface water that could access the sewage system. But other than that, and I do take Gerald's point there in respect of disabled car parking spaces. I think just one, in addition to the EV charging ones, is perhaps a little bit tight. But other than that, as long as you bear that in mind, I'm happy to propose that this is actually accepted and approved.
Thank you. So noted, councillor. Victoria.
Thank you, Chair. I do agree with councillor Withington's point about the loss of employment land. I think that's quite cogent because this isn't going to provide any employment. Are these going to be classed as second homes? Because if they are, if they're going to be occupied for 90 days a year, that is really very sad reflection on our housing stock. That's one issue I have. The glazing, there's an awful lot of glazing. It's right next to the AONB. Has any thought been put to using smart glass instead of, I mean, if you equate this to the Blakely Hotel, which at night looks like a ocean liner in the middle of a beautiful, pristine, dark area. I mean, I think this is a bit of an issue that should be addressed. And also the carbon footprint is pretty high. If you've got 37 apartments, each being visited 10 times a year, I make it 17.76 tons of CO2 a year that's being produced. And so say that this is absolutely in line with our carbon neutrality aspirations, I think is a little bit disingenuous. Thank you very much.
Okay, so you raised a number of questions there. I'll pick up on the question about, is this a second home? So that's been throughout the discussions with the applicant on this scheme, we've been pretty clear that these aren't to be second homes. So the way the development's laid out, despite the units don't have individual amenity space on site that you would expect for a dwelling. So these aren't to be used as second homes. The use class proposes C1, which is a hotel use. Now, there have been some questions about the ownership model in terms of how individual hotel apartments could potentially be sold to individual owners and let out through the hotel. In policy terms, there's no objection to that particular principle. There are many examples across the country of hotels that aren't just owned by one person. There may be multiple people that own them and let those rooms out through the main reception at the hotel. It's kind of making sure that if we are minded to grant permission, we condition so that they can't metamorphose into something that we wouldn't want in the first place. So there are conditions that we're suggesting to impose to restrict that they aren't someone's primary residence, to restrict the number of letting days that they can be used for by the individual per annum. We're suggesting 31 per year. We have a register of lettings. So we have a way, a mechanism to check to make sure these aren't being used by people as their primary residence or even as their secondary residence, staying there for long periods of time. Because the idea of this sort of development is that we have people coming in, staying, going to visit the local area, spending money locally, contributing to the economy. If we have them just used as single homes, second homes, the likelihood is they won't make that contribution to the local economy that we have from the turnover of people. Now, clearly, people coming and going to the hotel, they don't all come and go from Norfolk. They may come from further afield. So there will always be, with any tourism in Norfolk, relying on people coming into the district, there will always be some carbon impact from travel. So I don't think we'd ever get to a situation where we have a zero carbon position on tourism. But in terms of the use class, we are content with conditions. We can control the use of this building in an acceptable way.
Presumably those occupancy restrictions will be detailed in the conditions. Councillor Brown.
Good morning, everybody. Just picking up on what we debated back in March, we've not got the minutes in this agenda because it was the meeting before. Has there been any further discussion on solar panels over the car parking spaces as we have installed in the reef? Is there any appetite at all, or was it just drainage that's been discussed since we deferred it?
I believe the developer was largely content that the solar array on the roof and the other measures outlined help to provide compliance with policy EN6. In terms of the scope for a solar carport, that would it may be possible, but it certainly doesn't form part of this proposal as of right now.
So is that in effect saying that the developer is just wanting to do exactly what he needs to do just to comply with policy, but not go any further? Would that be fair?
I mean, it's fair to say that when the reef was developed, the solar panels that we're now building on there didn't form part of the application for the reef project. It was a retrofit later on down the line. So
That's
there's
not to deny that maybe they should have done that, is it? But
maybe, but what I'm saying is that it doesn't prevent in the future the option to install those sort of solar mounted car parking spaces at a later date. So it doesn't prevent that, but it just doesn't currently form part of this application.
if I can just come back, Chair, I completely agree with Councillor Withington that there's always competition for a finite amount of land in any, particularly in any coastal area. And it's disappointing that this site couldn't be developed either for employment, greater employment, should I say, or for social housing. But that said, I don't think it's the best design, I'm afraid. It's a faux design in effect, Art Deco design, not using particularly local vernacular materials. Okay, it sits between two non-domestic sites, so you could argue that there's mitigation in that respect there. But it is disappointing in that, in my view, that we are missing an opportunity to provide some social housing for Sheringham on that site. So although I'll just about support this, I'll only be applauding it with one hand, I'm afraid. And I'm certainly not proposing or seconding. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, councillor. Anybody else wishes to have a go? Tim?
Yeah, thank you. Just going back again on that 90-day occupancy restriction, which presume applies to each individual suite. Can I just ask, is that standard condition with this sort of accommodation? I obviously, I know this isn't sort of thing we've seen elsewhere in the district before this, a Partel type provision, but is that the approach that's taken elsewhere, or is indeed that the approach with B&Bs and other such serviced accommodation, which of course this is not? Thank you.
As you say, we don't have many of these types of applications. I think this is the first. I mean, I've been here nearly 20 years, and this is the first time we've had this type of scheme in the district. It's about finding solutions to problems. And if the concern is that will people be staying there for long periods of time, then we can impose conditions that control the use of that. So you're not having repeated bookings and effectively staying there for the whole year and it becoming a de facto dwelling. So it's about how we control that. I mean, we've been looking at other schemes across the country. We've got for most holiday accommodation where it is in effect could be someone's second home. We have the register of lettings policy requirements for people to keep a register of lettings. We look at 140 days per year, so it is in effect a business rather than it just becoming a second home. And so there are controls that we would normally put in for second homes, but clearly we don't want this to be a second home. We want there to be a turnover of people who come into our district as you would do in an ordinary hotel. I think the nagging doubt that probably we all have is that does the ownership model, will it encourage people to use them as their second home? And we feel with these conditions it will help dissuade that as an option and give us the tools that we need as a planning authority to enforce were there to be breaches of planning control. And that's what you need to have, is effective conditions that can be enforced if people don't adhere to those requirements.
Councillor Toy.
Excuse me if I'm not very confident, it's my first time here, but I just want to point out the comments that were made on behalf of residents about the design and the materials used. To me, it's not near any other building nearby that uses that traditional Norfolk materials, and I think it's in keeping with the reef as well. If you look at the reef, it's quite imposing. So I think that looking at it as I've seen it, it looks as though it goes in with the reef, and I think if you put anything in there that's more traditional, I think it will stick out even more. I have to question as to whether it's needed at all. If we have good bed and breakfast and small hotels in the area, why this 37 suite hotel? Why is that being considered?
Thank you. I would just say at that point, I think my other hat on, in terms of economic development, the demand from tourists tends to be now for self-contained accommodation ever since the COVID fiasco. And traditional hotels and B&Bs are disappearing. The demand is for self-contained, and I think this does meet that. But I accept the other comments and debate long and hard about the economic needs of Sheringham. Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. Just wondering if we know we've referred to the lack of people maybe working on this. I wondered if we knew how many people there will be to service these units, how many people, how many jobs will be made. I mean, it occurs to me that Henry's, which is next door, the garage, has about half a dozen people working in there and may cover a similar area in as a footprint.
We don't have those figures immediately to hand, but bear with us and we'll try and get them before we get to the decision.
So can I just ask, is that the number of employees that you're looking for? It was 3 part-time, wasn't it?
Do you want to move on to any other questions?
Yes, I was going to say, do we have any figures on sort of what similar buildings require? I think we also have to remember that people staying there will be, by spending money in the district, creating jobs elsewhere. We're not just concerned with the numbers actually employed on care and maintenance of the building. Liz, you can come back.
Thank you. I'm sorry, this is one for Jeff, which I know you're scrabbling. I'm still not entirely clear if I, as an individual, come along and buy one of these apartments as my second home. As I would understand it, that limit is as long as I don't stay in it at any one time for more than 96 days, that meets the condition. And I can't see how it would, you can prevent people from buying it with that in mind. They may have it as a second home and let it out to friends and family or etc. as a lot of people do. But I can't see how that, the condition that we've got, I'm unclear as to how that would prevent that from happening.
Let me just clarify. So we're suggesting as a condition that no letting should be longer than, to an individual, should be no more than 31 days per annum. So the idea is that if you're a person, an individual booking that, you can't go back if you've stayed there more than 31 days per year. So the idea is that that dissuades people from having a long period of time booking it out for the whole summer or for extended periods, because that in effect would encourage use as a second home. The idea is to have that regular turnover of people in and out of those apartments. And that's what we're suggesting as a condition to encourage those short-term lets in that building.
Thank you, Chair. Who's going to monitor that? Who specifically in the building is going to go and look at that register of bookings?
That would be our planning enforcement team. So they would go, that's why we request the register of letting. So we have a record of who's in and out of that building. We do that for a lot of schemes, and that's why we have the condition. So we ask for it and we expect that to be provided to our enforcement team. And if that raises any doubts or questions about whether people are using it incorrectly, then we can proceed to take enforcement action.
I'm being a little bit generous here because normally we should only be speaking once.
clarification. I just noticed on page 28 that it says no more than 90 days in any 12-month period, because I was listening to the debate on that. So do you want to just clarify that, Jeff? I think it's the paragraph that starts, officers consider that occupancy of the hotel, and it says it's not to be used or occupied by a person as a sole or main residence. That's the first point. And the second is, and to restrict the occupancy to be no more than 90 days in any 12-month period. Jeff, you mentioned 31 days in any 12-month period. Do you want to just correct that?
No, yeah, no problem at all. I think it would be the 90 days is something that's pulled from the applicant's design and access statement. I think following the pre-committee briefing, Jeff and I have worked, and the 31 days seems like a much more reasonable control. It's in line with controls that we often put on many tourism accommodation developments and proposals in the district. And the 31 days does a much better job of allowing the controls and the turnover and the short-term letting that Jeff has been speaking about as well. So it would be, unfortunately, I think the report contains a slightly older reference than the situation that would be put to you and would be detailed on the decision notice today.
Yeah, apologies for any confusion there. It's, so things have moved on, which we've been responding to the concerns that have been raised from the pre-committee meeting. So if members wanted to have 90 days, then by all means you're entitled to vary the conditions that you want to impose if you were minded to grant. But we just think a lesser number is probably more likely to be successful at these units not becoming what members are concerned they could become. So. And on the answer to the employment question, Councillor Adams was correct. It is indicated as part-time, 3 number of posts being created. So we don't have the FTE equivalent of how many actual hours that would be, but the indication is 3 part-time roles.
Just to be clear on the occupancy, the condition in the recommendation will be for maximum 31 days.
31 days for any individual. So you in a calendar year. So you could use it for 31 days, but you couldn't then return within that year.
But you could be letting it on the Airbnb for another 31 days and 31 days.
But that's fine. If we're keeping a turnover of people, then that's fine. That's what it's designed to do as a hotel room, is to accommodate people to stay in the area.
Forgive me, Chair, because I'm new to all of this, but I just wanted to ask, with this 31-day restriction, is the developer confident that it's a commercially viable model and that it won't be sitting there unsold like some great white elephant, and that will be coming back to have to vary conditions of planning permission?
I mean, it's a slight shame that the applicant isn't here today to field questions from the committee. I mean, in the day, this is a C1 hotel. The applicant has applied for a C1 hotel, and in hotels you wouldn't expect to be staying there for long periods of time akin to a second home. So we've got nothing from the applicant that suggests that this isn't this is unviable anyway. Obviously, they could come back at a future date to vary. We couldn't prevent applicants from doing that, but on the decision today, we've not had anything from the applicant to say this is unviable.
So just for clarification, the individual units are not for private sale. It's going to be run on a hotel basis.
The units themselves, so the 37 individual apartments can be sold off to individuals, but those individuals would have to comply with the occupancy requirement. So in effect, you could buy an apartment, you could stay there yourself for 31 days per year, but for the remainder of the year, you'd have to let that through the hotel to be used by other people within that time frame. So it's the standard sort of a part hotel model that's used across the country.
Okay. It does raise a question, as to who enforcement would go after, the owners of the building or the owners of the individual apartments if there are breaches.
I mean, the likelihood is it would be the owner of the apartment that would be we would direct enforcement. Well, anyone with an interest in the land who's directly related, the enforcement team would want to be in contact with. But the likelihood is that would be the owner of the apart hotel if they're in breach of the condition.
And we would have a full record of those owners, presumably, our access to that information.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine a sale of land would be recorded on the land registry. I don't know if Fiona's got any advice on that, but
That's absolutely right. I think there's, I think the report also mentions that there's going to be a register maintained of ownership, the ownership position. So any breach of condition would be focused on I would imagine the leasehold owners in this instance.
Okay, I'll let you just come back then, Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair,
Being generous.
for having my indulgence. I was going to ask exactly the same question as you've just asked, but I've got the word abuse in my mind at the moment. We know, because we have an enforcement department, we know that conditions get abused, otherwise we wouldn't have one. The worry for me here is if you've got a 31-day restriction and you've got 11 members in the family as well as yourself, then you could supplant 11 members of the family for the other remaining months in the year. So it depends on how forensic the enforcement team are going to be drilling down into who actually stays there. So you get by default a second home. What is there going to be in the condition that will mitigate that happening?
I don't necessarily want to get into the technicalities of enforcement.
No, please do. Be my guest.
But of course, if there are people abusing the process, then the enforcement team can investigate. And if it turns out they are a family member, they can look at that and take action. If people are abusing it, then yes, we can take action. That's part of the enforcement team's role, is to investigate the details of any breach and decide whether it's in the public interest to take action. Clearly, if people are using it for a second home, then that's a material change of use, and that would be something that we would frown upon, given the concerns about lack of amenity space and all the things you'd expect for individual residents that are lacking on this site. So if we were talking about a scheme for 37 individual dwellings, we wouldn't get 37 individual dwellings because there wouldn't be enough space for the amenity space that those units would need. So it would be a much smaller development. But that's not what the applicant's putting forward for consideration today. It's a C1 hotel for 37 apartments. And that's what you as a committee need to consider on the basis, not what it could become through some kind of action in the future that to breach planning control.
That's all.
So I just follow on from that. Yes, I agree that we have to take the application that's in front of us, but maybe there would be better recording if we perhaps consider the registration of any vehicles that were there. It may be they come by public transport. Of course, we would encourage that. But if, as Councillor Brown suggests, it would make the process easier. What I'm saying is if the vehicle that's using it at that time, if they come by vehicle, is recorded as well, because if the same vehicle is there beyond the 30 odd days, then it would suggest something different. But just part of the register to record any vehicle registration may be helpful for any future actions. It's a suggestion.
Do that for insurance purposes.
Yeah. So, okay, thank you.
Is that technically feasible? Yeah.
Anything's technically feasible. It's just it's the scratching one's head to work out how you word a condition to require that. But
when you have put it in the register, request it, when the register is signed and the names are noted, that they also put their vehicle registration there, unless there's anything under privacy laws which prevent that. I can't think there is at the moment, but
I mean, in most hotels you go to, you have to give your number plate if you're staying on site. So it's not an uncommon thing to do. Especially you say it's just about data protection and whether we're in breach of any data regulations. But
that's all yeah. I just think it would give us something that we could work on to guard against the things that happen.
And I think the key thing is that we say to the applicant, if we are minded to approve, these are the things we want you to collect as part of the register of lettings, and then and if there is a breach, we can ask them for that information and then they can send it to us. That's,
Okay, I'll allow Gerard, and then I think we need to move on.
It's just perhaps we should have mentioned to the new members at the beginning of the meeting that if anybody leaves the room, they can't vote. I just noticed a member's left
Just to confirm that member is just observing today. He's not a voting member. He's just.
And I just think we should point that out.
Yes. Well, correct there. I assume that had been covered in training. Yeah. Okay, I have a proposer from Councillor Fitch-Tillett. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. So if we move to the recommendation then, could you put it up on screen, please? So at least clear, I'm not sure all the tech is working today. Okay, the recommendation is for approval, subject to the conditions listed below with the details defined by the Assistant Director of Planning. Proposed by Councillor Fitch-Tillett, seconded by Councillor Mancini-Boyle. We've got your list there then, Lauren?
Councillor Adams,
Yes.
Councillor Brown,
With not total enthusiasm, yes.
Councillor Fisher,
4.
Councillor Fitch-Tillett, 4, Councillor Hankins, Councillor Heinrich,
4.
Councillor Holiday, Councillor Mancini-Boyle, Councillor Neverway, Councillor John Toy,
4.
Councillor Kim Toy, Councillor Liz Vickers, 4, and Councillor Wivington.
I'll abstain because I may be considered to be predetermined.
Okay, so that motion is carried. That is 11 votes for, 1 against and 1 abstention.
Thank you. The recommendation is approved. Right. Thank you. Thank you for that. I think we gave that quite a good going over. So we move on to development management performance update. Yeah.
Okay, so for the benefit of new members, this part of the agenda, we would normally, well, we do talk about the performance in the development management team in terms of how we're doing. So the report provides a table of the performance for the month of up to the 30th of April this year. So that's decisions made within that month. So as you can see on the table, we've had 3 major decisions issued and 57 non-major decisions issued. Now, I am pleased to report that all 60 of those decisions were issued within time or within an agreed extension of time. So that's that's excellent performance. Obviously, I would say that, wouldn't I? But we're doing very well as a team in terms of getting those decisions out within agreed timeframes. The government target for majors is 60% and the government target for non-majors is 70%. So we're doing very well on that. And our 24 rolling month performance is so 97.22% of all major applications are decided in time or with an agreed extension of time, and 89.14% of all non-majors are decided in time or with an agreed extension of time. So yeah, that puts us sort of upper quartile of performance nationally in terms of our planning function. So yeah, I am hoping to get us over the 90% for the DM team as well in terms of our in terms of non-major applications. So that's our next target. For new members, the performance has been slightly held back by some periods of poor performance linked to the introduction of a new back office system just under 2 years ago. So that will drop out of our 24-month reporting period, and that will hopefully lead to a lift for those subsequent periods of time. So yeah, if you have 1 quarter of poor performance, that has quite a long-term impact in terms of how we report performance back to government. So that's why we're going through the planning service improvement plan at the moment to maximise the performance of the service. It's not just about process at the end of the day, but it's important that we can report to government that we are performing, we are delivering decisions quickly, but it's also about delivering good outcomes. There's no point having a quick process that leads to poor outcomes. We want to have good outcomes, but do that quickly as well, get those decisions issued in good time. The other measure that we have from government is what they call a quality measure. It's always quite hard to decide quality in planning. It's so open to interpretation, but government have decided that's how many of your decisions that were refused are subsequently overturned at appeal? So as we'll come to at the end of the agenda, our appeal record is very good as an authority. So far, the 24-month average to the end of April is 0.42% of our applications are overturned at appeal. So that's a percentage of the total number of decisions that we're issuing as an authority. Again, that's putting us right up there at the top in terms of national performance. For majors, the figure's a little bit higher than we'd like. It's 2.78%, but that actually links to one appeal case we've had that's gone against this for a site at Holt. So that one case can have an impact for that period of time. We'll soon pass that period when that decision was issued, and we're back up to where we want to be, which is like to be around about 0%. So yeah, pretty pleased so far with speed and quality decisions. We are still getting quite a number of applications coming into the department. So nationally, there's been a slight trend for case numbers to be dropping at the moment, but we've not actually experienced that. If you speak to the officers at the minute, although their caseloads generally are coming down because we are improving the processing time, they are still very busy. So I'm sure you'll have that sort of feedback fed back to you at any time when you interact with our officers. So yeah, so that's the data on performance, and so I'm happy to take any questions before we move on to section 106.
I think it's an appropriate point to congratulate you and your team on your efforts. Things have really come on in the last 12 months.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as portfolio holder, I just want to reiterate those remarks from the Chair. Congratulations for the improved performance. I've got no concerns, obviously, on the decisions made. It's just really all about the majors and non-majors, and the quality of those improving. I'm sure as we get used to the system, it will. And for new members to the committee, you should be aware it's part of my briefing cabinet to introduce or oversee the Planning Service Improvement Plan, which is, we use the acronym PSIP, to drive through modifications and improvements to the way that we operate in the face of fairly savage central government funding to planning over the last 15 years. It's meant a shortfall in funding if it were increased by inflation of up to 40 to 50%. So the climate is challenging for our planning service and planning services across the country. And that is what we're up against, but we're determined to improve things and make the best of the resources that we're given, and to deliver an even better service than the excellent service we're already providing for our residents in North Norfolk. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, and the rest 106 agreements.
Thank you. I'm trying really hard to chase applicants on these. You'll see in red that the Malting site. We have emailed between us all, Norfolk County Council, a few times now, chasing up on the traffic regulation order process at quite a significantly higher level than officer level, and just trying to keep the pressure on county to progress the traffic regulation orders in the hope that the applicant will then sign the section 106 agreement. It is difficult. We chase very regularly, and it's disappointing that we haven't yet been able to grant planning permission for this one. I think that's the major problem with the 106s. It's the Malting site. The others are progressing nicely, and the cattle shed, I think, will complete in a few days. We've also had on the Holt site, the Hopkins home site, we've now had the draft deed of variation, including the developer uplift contribution clauses, which we're looking at.
Thank you. Any questions?
Mr. Chair, thank you to Fiona for all the work that she does with section 106 agreements. It's really good to receive these reports. Thank you.
Indeed. Item 10, appeal. Yes.
Okay, so this part of the agenda, we sort of list out the live appeals that we have as a planning service. So there'll be a list of the new appeals that we have, and then sort of progress for a number of inquiries that we have. So there's different types of appeals. So we have majority what called written reps appeals. So there's basic correspondence in writing between ourselves and the planning inspectorate and the appellant. There's informal hearings, and there's public inquiries. Frankly, we don't get many public inquiries because they're very resource intensive. So this is the list of where we are. There's a few updates that I've got on the list. I know members will want to ask questions about what's happening at Clyde, because it says on here we're awaiting decision from the inspectorate. But actually, we did receive the decision from the planning inspectorate on these appeals. I don't want to go into too much detail at this stage because the inspector's decision was issued last week. I'm aware that the applicant is obviously looking at the inspector's decision to see whether there's any grounds to potentially challenge it. They have 6 weeks from the appeal date to look at that. The outcome was that in the main the appeals were dismissed. So the appellant is required to remove the house on the site by, as I understand it, October next year. So they've given quite a long time frame to remove the dwelling on the site. However, the inspector has allowed an annex and a swimming pool to be retained on the site. So there's structures that are permitted, but the main subject of the appeal was the house and the size of the house and the site, and that's the inspector's concluded that has to be taken down by October next year. So I'm not celebrating yet. No one's celebrating yet because it can be a long, drawn-out process when you have enforcement appeals and buildings to be demolished. So yeah, we'll watch this space and we'll keep you sort of updated as to progress. I don't know if at that point if anybody has any questions on Clyde before we move to the rest of the agenda. Already had a view, but
I see one or two smiles.
okay, we'll move on from that. So we've also had in the written reps appeals decisions, we have had 2 appeal decisions since this agenda was drafted. So at North Walsham, 1 Millfield Road, which again was a single-storey garden annex building, that has been dismissed by the inspectorate. And at Rowton for New Inn, Norwich Road and Rowton, again, that was an appeal that has been dismissed by the inspector. So, as I said earlier, our appeal record is typically very good, and we make a decision to refuse, it's usually for the right reasons, and long may that continue by this committee as well. So I'm happy to take any questions on items on the appeal section.
Yes, we seem to be maintaining a fairly good record, which is partly to officers, partly to the quality of decision making by members. Just one question, Jeff. We still seem to have a large number outstanding. Are any indications from Lynn as to when we might get a few more through?
Just get my crystal ball out.
I thought you'd say that.
It's been quite challenging. I mean, the planning inspector have had recruitment challenges like most departments across government. They've, I think, at different levels. So I think at certain levels they've got enough inspectors, and other levels they're struggling to recruit. And I think it entirely depends on the complexity of an appeal as to whether it falls into too difficult to deal with or we haven't got capacity. And I think they are struggling to turn these decisions around. So it's not helpful because there are clearly appellants and interested parties who are left in limbo waiting for decisions to be made, because people's lives are often on hold whilst they're waiting for planning decisions. So yeah, all we can do is continue to chase politely. The last thing we want to do is antagonize or wind up the planning inspectorate. But yeah, we do ask questions if a long time has passed since we were expecting a decision, and we'll continue to do that just to hopefully get some more through. But we've had a few. If we keep that constant couple of cases decided each month, that we'll hopefully get the list down.
Yes, it certainly does seem to be improving. So maybe somebody's kicked somebody whatever. Okay, thank you for that. I'm not aware of any private business, in which case there's no need to exclude the press and public, and therefore declare the meeting closed at It is 10:35, quite a short one, not quite a